Welcome to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. This episode is part of our Indies Introduced series, where we spotlight debut authors handpicked by booksellers from around the country. In each episode, a bookseller from the Indies Introduced panel will interview the author of a debut title featured in our program.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jenny from Boswell Book Company, located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm so pleased to be here today with Clíodhna O'Sullivan from speaking to us from Ireland. She is a writer based in County Louth, Ireland. She works as a legal counsel and plays in a band. You can find them on Spotify. She's married with 3 children, as well as far too many cats and a dog. Now, Clíodhna, can you first pronounce your name correctly for us and the name of the county that you're located in, which I probably mispronounced?
Yeah, sure. No, my name perfect. Like it is. Yeah, it's Clíodhna, and yeah, it's Louth. So Irish names are weird because what happened was that they started off as being names in Irish. That then, because we were kind of run by the British, we were part of the British Empire. They sort of anglicized the Irish names. So it's actually Contain na Lú is what it would be in Irish, and then that got anglicized into Louth. So it totally makes sense that people can't pronounce them because they kind of have this really weird way of having come into existence, you know.
So the first question I want to ask you is, speaking of Ireland, how did Irish mythology inspire your world building in your book?
Yeah, so like her hidden fire is a fantasy, absolutely. But yeah, look, the Irishness like runs through it like a stick of rock, to be honest. And in the sense that like I was very much inspired by kind of the Irish language and the landscapes and myths and so on in kind of coming up with the world. So for example, like the names in the book are all based on, or well, not all the names, but many of the names in the book are based on Old Irish, which is called Ogham. And it's kind of like this really ancient language that it was done in hieroglyphics. So you can still find standing stones all around Ireland now that are thousands of years old where they have Ogham script on them. And it's literally like, say, it might be 4 lines for the letter E or 5 lines for the letter E, 4 for A, and so on. So when you look at the names, and we did provide a glossary at the start because obviously we don't expect people to be fluent in Old Irish. So, like, we have a little glossary at the start of the book that explains here's the name and here's how you actually pronounce it. But for example, they live in Alam's Keep, but Alam as a word is actually the letter A in Ogham, and it's also associated with the Scots pine because it's a tree-based language. And then similarly, like Beha, who's one of the characters, her name comes from the Ogham for the letter B, and it's the birch tree. So each character, the central characters, they'll have a name that's like so taken from Ogham, and it's also associated with a letter and a tree and so on. So I thought it was quite nice that there's kind of like it's a bit like when you read Lord of the Rings and you know that like Tolkien really loved all the old English that he put into his stories, and it gave it a kind of a sense of an authenticity to it and a depth to it. And
Yes.
for me it was the same, that like, because I think a huge part of fantasy is the world, like being able to immerse yourself in the world. And I think it's easier to immerse yourself in a fantasy world if it feels fantastical but also authentic, and as if it has like a real depth to it and as if there's a real love to it. So for me it was kind of like, well, if Tolkien can use Old English, I can use Old Irish, and I'm going to use Irish landscapes and so on, because then to me they'll feel authentic and they do have a real depth in the sense that they're coming from something that's thousands of years old. So, say for example, like the places in the story are also based mostly on real places in Ireland. So, for example, when the characters go to the Magic Academy, it's called the Master's House, and it's on the islands of Lambay. But the Master's House is actually based on a real castle in North Dublin on the east coast of Ireland called Argyllin Castle. Because it's a place I go to a lot because it's really beautiful, and it's kind of this amazing setting where it's got like the Irish Sea behind it, and it's surrounded by forests, and it's really beautiful, but it's also slightly scary looking, slightly forbidding. So you can completely imagine masters with their kind of, keeping secrets from their students while they're there and so on. So, and what I did was I kind of took this castle, and in my head, I kind of transplanted it to a real island off the coast of Ireland called Lambay. just to raise the stakes for the central character Aya a little bit more, because she'd be isolated in this school that's far away out on an island, and she's in danger and so on. So yeah, absolutely. And another example would be, I grew up looking up the Blackstairs Mountains in Ireland, and I just thought Blackstairs is the coolest name for a mountain range, especially if you wanted to sound a bit scary. So again, I kind of dragged them north in the map, but they're there. So yeah, very much kind of Irish language, Irish landscapes, all that kind of thing would very, very much sort of feeding into it, because they're things that I already knew and love. And I was kind of hoping that that kind of sense of kind of wonder and affection would come through on the page, so to be easier for the reader to kind of really get into the world, because it would feel fantastical, but also a little bit real.
I do understand what you're saying, and you did a wonderful job of bringing the setting to life in the book. And it's wonderful that it's a place that I can actually go and visit. And so
Hmm.
many times you read a fantasy novel and you think, oh, that I would love to see this place. Well, in your book, I really can go and take a look for myself. And I'm
I
looking
know.
forward to doing that someday.
Yeah, no, I'm totally going on tour, because we have book two done, and I again used kind of one of my favorite places, which is Colmore Abbey, which is this abbey in the west of Ireland. So like that has a big role in book two, and it's stunning. And then book three, again, I'm writing it at the moment, and like I'm using one of my famous favorite islands off the southwest coast. So yeah, I'm just completely stealing from bits of Ireland that I like, to write these books. So.
So, how would you describe the dynamic between your two main characters? I'm going to do my best to pronounce her name, Ada
So
and
yeah, yeah.
Aya, and the boy that she loves, whose name is, how would
Yeah,
you say it?
it's Yonon.
Yonan?
Yeah.
Yes. So, how would you describe the dynamic between them in your story?
Well, I suppose it might help to like give sort of slightly the roots of where I was coming from personally. So I kind of grew up fairly poor in rural Ireland, and it was really isolated where I lived, which meant that there were no kids that were my age, and my main job was kind of looking after my youngest sister, who is 10 years younger than me. So in the kind of summer holidays, I wouldn't see another teenager for like weeks on end. Literally, like the only guy I would see was, it was a guy whose father used to own cattle in the field up above us. So he would send his son, who was about my age, up to drive the cattle down the road. And that would be the highlight of my day, would be like literally just hanging out at the gate and just going, hello, how are you? As he went past, and he'd go, how are you? And that was it. That was my exciting social interaction with another teenager for the day. So when I sat down to write Her Hidden Fire, it was complete wish fulfillment, that it was that the main character would she would grow up somewhere rural and isolated away from the rest of the world, but she would have a best friend, and so someone to be with her and just do everything with, and that would eventually kind of grow into kind of a friends, to realizing, gosh, we're kind of 17, and we're kind of realizing that maybe we feel a little bit more for each other. So it was a wish fulfillment thing, in terms of starting to write the story, that it would be kind of a childhood friends to lovers, as people like to kind of call the trope. But I think then, in terms of the relationship itself, what I tried to show was that you can have a relationship that is genuine, and they do really care about each other, but then it's going to maybe get put under a lot of strain when they each of them start making decisions. So Aya, for example, obviously, this isn't a spoiler, because it's like kind of the thing that happens at the very start of the book, is that Aya discovers that she has a magical gift to channel power. But it's Yunon who is the person who desperately needs to have that gift, because he's the last heir of a failing noble family. And if he doesn't have the gift, his family is going to lose everything. So, in the first chapter, at his really big, very public moment of reckoning, she gives him her power. So, she gives up her opportunity to be a star and gives it to him instead, because she thinks he needs it more. And that's a huge sacrifice that she's made. And it's the thing that kind of changes her fate and his fate, and ends up changing the fate of their whole world. But just to your question about the relationship, for the first time in their lives since they were tiny kids together, she's now introduced a lie into their relationship, or a secret into their relationship. And of course, that's going to change the dynamic in that relationship, because now she's keeping something from him. And she's actually, then as the book goes on, she suffers for that secret, because he's being celebrated, as this golden boy, who's amazingly gifted and talented. And she's being treated as a nobody who has no real gift and who can be bullied. And she's the only one who knows that, actually she's the powerful one. He's not gifted, So it's kind of there's this it's not his fault, but she still feels like a little bit of anger towards him. Do you know what I mean? Because she's having to suffer so much because of the sacrifice that even though she chose to make, she's kind of slightly blaming him for it. It's interesting actually, just for what it's worth. I was thinking about this because I don't know if you saw on social media, but over the last week or so, the biggest trailer in the world is the new Spider-Man movie. And it's all in the trailer. It's all about like how in the previous movie, Spider-Man, so Tom Holland, who plays Peter Parker, makes this huge sacrifice where he accepts that everybody forgets who he is, and he loses the girl that he loves, and he loses all his friends. And so he makes this huge sacrifice, and then he has to carry the burden of that sacrifice alone. And it's like the most watched trailer in the world ever, I think. And I think and I do kind of feel like saying, hey, hang on a second, her hidden fire got there first. Because like that's literally kind of what Aya is doing, is that she makes this huge sacrifice in the sense that she gives her power to someone else. Nobody else knows, only Aya knows, and she's carrying the burden of that sacrifice. But it's slightly poisoning her relationship with the guy she loves, because she's kind of resenting him, even though it's not his fault because she didn't tell him. And also, at some point, you're kind of asking yourself the question: can you ever have a healthy relationship with someone if it's based on a lie? Like, she's 17, so of course she's not thinking these things through. Obviously, I'm a little bit older, so I'm kind of going, like, at some point, are you going to tell him that he's not gifted? Like, what, and then what happens? When you've made a lie out of his life and who he thinks he is. And then just to finish out the question, I suppose, so there's stuff that she does that is actually unintentionally and with the best will in the world, but still puts a big strain on their relationship as well as on her. But then similarly, he's kind of, what happens is that, again, you can have someone who you love when it's just the two of you at home in your familiar place. But then when they go to this very fine, very fancy academy, and he's being treated as like this absolute golden prince, it starts to look as though he's had his head completely turned by that. And everybody wants to marry him, and there's huge pressure on him from his parents to make a good match. And Aya, because she's a servant girl, she's definitely not a good match. So it starts to look as though, he's kind of gotten swept up in that thing, and he's not looking out for her. Now, it is more nuanced than that, in the sense that because he's very much your kind of classic son of a noble family who understands you have to play the game, but it doesn't mean you mean it. It just means that you make the right alliances, you make the right friends, you smile when you're supposed to smile. And that's all stuff that he's really good at, because he's been trained to do that, because he's from a noble family where she hasn't. But she can't understand, why are you being like this? Whereas to him, it's like, this is what my mother and my father trained me to do, is that when I go to this academy, this is how I have to be. So it's just kind of interesting, and kind of taking a really strong relationship and then putting it under massive strain, but partly because of their circumstances, but also partly because of these choices that they're making, where they're also just not talking to each other enough, you know what I mean, and not actually accepting that the other person needs, is a real human being with real feelings, who needs to, you need to talk stuff out with them, and that's tragically what they don't do.
And the whole time the reader knows about the
And the
lie.
whole time, yeah, exactly.
Right.
The whole time the reader
So
knows
we're
about the lie.
reading and thinking and under so much tension as to
Mm.
what's going to happen when and if he ever does find out.
Yeah, exactly. And that's it. That's that kind of wondering of, gosh, is this a secret? Do you really seriously think this is a secret that can just be kept forever?
Exactly. It was brilliantly done.
Well,
Um,
it's kind of funny, because when I look at some of the reviews, I don't look at the reviews now on Goodreads, but just at the very start, when you're kind of overexcited and the first few Goodreads reviews are coming out and that, and you're reading a few, and they're kind of going, I was screaming at the page at her for being so stupid, and why didn't she do this, and why didn't she do that? But to be fair, like when you're writing the story, that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to ratchet it up. Like you think, okay, so this happens to you, but you don't reveal your secret. How about if something worse happens to you and you still don't reveal your true power? How about if this really bad thing happens to you and you still don't reveal? Each time A is being put in these situations where she could use her power to get out of it, and she could use her power to be like really celebrated and kind of, oh my God, you're the golden one. And each time the test is, will her loyalty to Yunnan hold, and will her loyalty to protecting him hold, so that instead she kind of takes the beating, or she takes the humiliation, instead of showing what she can really do.
well, she had valid reasons for doing what she
Mm.
did.
She did, yeah. It was absolutely done with the best of intentions, but sometimes you can do something with the best of intentions, but also, and that's something that gets explored quite a bit in book two, I'll be honest with you, is kind of slightly for people who are annoyed at Yunnan for being maybe a bit clueless in book one. It's book two splits out into three points of view. So you kind of get his point of view for the first time, so that you're kind of maybe a bit less inclined to think he's an idiot, because you're kind of going, okay, so this is where you were coming from, and as well as kind of seeing her point of view, which I really, really enjoyed.
So, what draws you to romantasy, both as a writer and as a reader?
So like I can very much remember. So like my parents, my dad was an alcoholic, and my it was back in the day in Ireland when divorce wasn't allowed. So my parents were stuck together and were kind of just fought a lot, and there was a lot of conflict in the house. So books were very much my outlet, and I would say there was kind of like back then it was a little bit more split as a category. So you had romance books and you had fantasy books, but they were the two actually that I read. So I would get the fantasy books from the library, and I had an aunt of mine who read a lot of romance books, and so she would give me like literally a carrier bag full of romance books when I would go and visit her. And I think part of it is just when you get to that age of kind of, I don't know, like I can't remember exactly, but maybe 15, 16, 17, you want to understand how this works. And maybe a little bit partly is because I'm autistic myself. So like I kind of always feel like I don't instinctively get maybe how things work with people. So I sort of tend to almost like study it, like as if I'm kind of like an anthropologist. I'm kind of trying to understand how this works. So for me, what draws me to reading things like romance and romantasy novels, and that is trying to understand, because as a kid I saw the bad version, when love has failed and it's gone wrong and whatever. I suppose I wanted to read about how love can really work and how transformative it can really be. And I think romantasy is actually a beautiful way to do that, because usually it's done in the context of also big stakes in the world as well. Do you know what I mean? And that's how like romance works in real life. I mean, like I'm with my husband 30 years now, because we met in college, and we've been through so many like family tragedies and all these things. Do you know what I mean? So there is that sense of like real romance happens while big things in the real world is also happening at the same time. So I think what's something that's lovely about the romantasy genre, even though like romantasy as a word is still quite young, I suppose, as a word. But actually, what I do love about it is it's not only romance, and you know what I mean, that the romance is happening and it's very intense, but it's always happening in the context of the real world getting in the way, which is what real life actually is like as well, because there's these big
Yes.
events in a fantasy there tend to be big events like a war or dragons or whatever it is. So yeah, I do I love reading about it, partly because I have such a soft spot for, partly because of my own kind of upbringing of kind of watching love maybe have some chance of prevailing against the odds, particularly in something like a fantasy where the odds are usually quite high.
Who's the most challenging character to write?
Yeah, so this one is kind of a little bit down to me, so it's not the character's fault. But Gry was actually the one I found the hardest to get, ultimately to get right, I think, because so when I set out to write it, I had two issues, I would say. So number one, I was against love triangles because I had seen a few love triangles that I thought were more like love lines, the way where it was kind of like, oh, who will she pick? And it's like, no, I'm sorry, but it's really obvious who she's going to pick right from the get-go. So this is not a love triangle. This is a love line. I'm looking at you, Twilight, for example, like this. So I just thought I am not doing a love triangle. I'm doing childhood friends to lovers, and she will have a chum who is called Gry, who she will meet at the college and who will be useful for providing information about the college when she gets there. But that's it. He's just a friend. And then I would have people, who friends of mine or my husband or whoever, who would read the early drafts of the book and they go, "Hey, I'm Team Gry. I really like him." Like I was like, "No, there's no love triangle there. This is she's over there with Yunnan. There's no love triangle." And another part of it was the fact that I also didn't have a lot of dialogue in the early drafts of my book. And part of the reason for that was because when I was younger, I was bullied an awful lot for saying the wrong thing, and either having no filter, like being a bit direct, or saying the wrong thing. And in Ireland in particular, Ireland very much works by silences and secrets and not talking. Even now in kind of slightly more, liberal Ireland, but it's still very much about how you have to know automatically what not to say. And I don't have that ability. So, and I'm very aware of it. So I got bullied for years, very severely for a good few years in our secondary school. And so I came away kind of convinced that I wasn't any good at like human interaction stuff. So at getting conversation right. So in the early drafts of the book, Gry was just a chum and the characters were barely talking to each other. And then I kind of sent the manuscript for review, and the reviewer was very nice, and she said, "Look, it's a lovely book, but you really do need to get people to care for your characters, so they do need to talk to each other a bit." So I kind of had to get over my own kind of like self-sabotage and kind of lack of faith in my ability to write, intense kind of relationship type conversations, and that and actually start doing that. But then also to realize that the reason people were drawn to Gry was because he was doing something different. And there was a really nice review of the book in the Irish Times that put it really well, where it kind of said that like it kind of said the oft maligned love triangle is not they work when it's not just about her choosing who to kiss, but it's about her choosing who she wants to be. And I think and I thought that was a really nice way of putting it, that like the reason people were, when they read the book, were kind of going, oh well, Gry is a challenger, if you like, is because Yonnon on the one hand represents familiarity and stability and loyalty, and they're all very things that are very important to her. But then equally, sometimes if you know someone for your whole childhood, you don't recognize that as you're growing, like as you turn 16, 17, 18, you're changing and you're coming into yourself and you're acquiring new skills, and maybe finding stuff you're really good at, and becoming a new person off the back of that. And in Fantasyland, that's heightened because, this is her coming into her power. And actually, instead of being the NPC in the relationship, in the sense that, the relationship between her and Yonnon as kids is that he's the one who has the destiny and she's just like a servant who has no destiny. Whereas now she's actually become someone who has power and who has the potential to change the world. And Yonnon and the people who know her from home are probably the last people who are going to see that, because they have their very set idea of that's just little Aya or little servant girl. Whereas Gry meets her on the island and actually sees who she's becoming, because he's got no baggage. So he's just going to see who she is now, today, without any of that baggage. And actually see, the potential in her. And the attraction between them is very different because it's their power is drawn to each other. And so he kind of represents kind of challenge, and well, what are you going to do about it, and how do you want to use it, to make a difference in the world? So but then again, he's not so much maybe about the affection and the just loving her for herself, separate to her power, So it is, I hope that's the plan over the books, what I mean, is to kind of draw that out a bit more, that it is a huge choice. It's sort of, love versus power, and stability versus challenge, and who does she want to be? And so that was what made writing Gry quite difficult, because I started him out. I mean, I don't know if you ever watched Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but he's like my Spike character, where in the sense that, Spike starts out as the villain of the week, but then he's so good that he kind of writes himself into contention. So that by the end he's a central character in the show. So Gry was my Spike character, that he sort of started out as like just barely not one of the central characters, but then wrote himself in because actually it made for a more interesting dynamic between the three of them, do you know?
Yeah, I see exactly what you mean. And he's an easy character to like. And I thought it was
Mm.
interesting as well that he doesn't have the same background with
Mm.
her that the rest of the characters do. So he can love her from where she is right now,
Ex exactly,
moving
exactly. Yeah.
forward. Yes, yes. Um, so part of what makes her Hidden Fire such an unforgettable read is the way that you examine what it means to be powerful. Some characters crave power for its own sake. Others desperately need it to feel safe, and still others use it reluctantly. What drew you to explore power in the world that you created?
Yeah, so that one goes back really far because as I mentioned earlier, things were tight at home as a kid because my dad was an alcoholic and he was addicted to gambling. So I was your kind of classic eldest daughter of an alcoholic, so took on a lot of responsibilities, and I also tried to be perfect. Which, if you look at the literature for adult, like for kids of alcoholics or whatever, there's one category is the what they call like the hero child, which is not a great phrase, but it kind of captures the one who kind of thinks if I do everything perfectly and I never get in any trouble, that will somehow fix things at home. So I got like this like maximum score in Ireland, which was really unusual at the time. And I had a place to study medicine in college, but then I couldn't go because my father's gambling debts were so high. So I was at home. I was 16. I couldn't go to college, even though I had the place and the points and everything, you know. So which is weirdly an echo of Aya, you know what I mean? That I had this very coveted thing of magic, this power, but then I chose not to use it because my mum had said the only way I could go to college would be if she went to money lenders because of my dad's debts, you couldn't get a loan, but we could go to these kind of like shady money lenders maybe and do it. And I said, I just couldn't bear the idea of my mum sort of trying to do something like that. So I said, no, it's okay, I'll do it myself. So when I was kind of 16, 17, it was Ireland. It was really hard to come by jobs. So I was lying about my age and kind of, you know, working as a fruit picker and a factory worker and a cleaner and a waitress and a singer and all, okay, basically doing like a whole bunch of like what we now call side hustles that you kind of all kind of pull together to try and make like enough money to go to college. And the thing is, when you're doing those kind of jobs, and somewhere in the back of your mind, you're kind of going, I have this thing that like any middle class kid would love to have, which is maximum points in a place to study medicine, and I can't use it. And instead, I'm this completely invisible nobody working these jobs, and I'm seeing how there's so much exploitation. And there was kind of that, you know, in the sense, and also that some of the people who do the exploiting, I'm sorry to say this, but they do get to be the kind of big man around town. But really, it's just like this old trope of paying like young, vulnerable people like me under the table and or whatever. And you know, just realizing why is the world like this? Like why are some people so prepared and find it so easy to exploit other people when other people have no interest in that at all? Like, because the flip of it was, and there were also people who were really good to me at that time. So they helped me find jobs because they could see this is ridiculous that this academic kid isn't getting to go on ahead and study and maybe do stuff. So they helped me find jobs and they passed me on like tutoring work and all this kind of stuff. So they're the kind of the givers of this world, you know, who will give of themselves. So that was kind of like the seeds of the idea for Her Hidden Fire was kind of almost, I think sometimes you write books because you're trying to answer a question you don't know the answer to yourself. And I was kind of at 16, 17, seeing just how extractive some people are and then how good some other people are, but they get taken advantage of and kind of going, where do I fit in all this? Because as I grow up, I don't want to be one of it's horrible. I hate being a fruit picker. I hate, you know, I don't like working on a factory line. It's not fun. It's really hard. If I have to do this until I'm 65, it will wear me out. Do you know what I mean? So I don't want to be one of the exploited for the rest of my life, but I also don't want to be one of the exploiters. Do you know the way? And it felt like, oh my gosh, is this like this binary choice? So I always thought then I'm going to create this fantasy world which takes that, like what is a real issue in our world, and puts it on steroids, like really amps it up, so that the magic system in Her Hidden Fire is based on exploitation and drawing the life force out of people. And then is that the central character AI is someone like me who's kind of going, where do I fit in this? Because I don't want to be fodder. I don't want to get used up. But I definitely don't want to be a channeler, and I don't want to be exploiting people or using them at all. And she's very much and the central question when I set out to write the book was, can a giver like Aya, who gives from the heart and who gives her, instead of taking power, she gives her power to Yunon. Can a giver ever win out in a world that's run by takers? Because the whole point of takers is that because they're willing to exploit people and use them as just units or resources to use up. I mean, because like that was my experience. I can remember like as when I was a trainee lawyer, like being told I was nothing and nobody, you know, and you're just being treated as like someone to be used up and burned out. And there are people who are quite willing to do that, you know. So it was that kind of that Aya is the giver in this world of takers, but the takers are very powerful because they can draw on the kind of strengths of so many people to puff themselves up, where she just has her own heart. And almost the question I was asking is there a way a giver, you know, like the nurses and the firefighters and the teachers in our world, like Aya is the giver in this world, you know, can she prevail against the masters? And but then also realizing that actually if you're in a world that's run by takers and that like only celebrates taking and exploitation, what she's done with Yunnan at the very start without realizing it is something incredibly subversive, because she just gives, she makes a sacrifice, she gives something up, and she gives to Yunnan. And the point is, like, as the book goes on, you kind of realize that while she thinks her mission is keep secret for Yunnan, but actually because she's done this very subversive thing, and her gift is a very subversive one in the sense of something that's just purely giving from her heart, that actually she's someone the masters absolutely loathe. And she's actually kind of walking herself into like a lot of danger. So yeah, so that was kind of the roots of it, was kind of my own experiences as a teenager, and then just trying to understand why is it like this, and two, where do I fit, or how do you fit in a world where the choice can feel binary? And so Aya and Yunnan and Grai, each in their different ways, have to kind of like duck and dive and smile and lie to sort of try and not get sent for fodder, but also they don't want to be part of the exploitation though either. So they're sort of trying to find this middle way all the time, but it's really dangerous, you know?
I think while I was reading, I was thinking about the parallels between the power dynamic and structure in your book and our real world.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, very much so. And then that was, yeah, and that was, it was like the inspiration was definitely our world, and why do we do this? Number one, and two, how do you survive it? And I suppose for book three, there's a slight element of how do we change this? You know?
Well, then I will definitely look forward to book three.
So it's not all grim. Do you know what I mean? It like, and actually that was something that was really important to me, was that like it, because, and I think it resonates with today as well, is that, you know, that sense of kind of, you're in a world that is really tough and really hard, but it is still okay and still really important to fall in love and have your heart broken and fall in love again and have relationships and be happy in those moments. You know what I mean? That it's not just all grimness and love must be put to one side. It's actually, love is the thing that saves you, even in maybe a very difficult world, you know? When you find your other person or your other people who see the world the same way as you, because then you can kind of go, hey, I'm not crazy. I'm right to think that this world isn't right, that it could be better, that these are bad choices that have been made. And then when you find other people who see that too, and you realize you're not alone, you know?
Well, and I think that's a good way to put it when I, as a bookseller, am thinking about how to hand sell this book to teens. Teens are at a place in their life where they're looking for their people.
Mm, very much
And
so, yeah.
yes, very much so. And then it's also, though, a book that would definitely appeal to adults because of the way that the power dynamics are structured. I think we can, see the parallels in what's going on in our world right now. So this is just a great book to hand sell to both teens and adults.
Oh, well, thank you very much. As I say, it's a weird one, because you're kind of going, I'm writing this because it's a question that is really important to me, you know, to
Yes.
understand, because it's me trying to work out how I want to be in the world, and how to survive in the world we have now. So you just hope it will resonate with other people. And as I say, the Spider-Man trailer kind of gave me a bit of a lift, because I was kind of going, yeah, you see, they're asking the same question, you know?
And I think many of us are asking that question, how do we survive in the world right now?
Yeah, yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much for being with me today and having this conversation. It was just a lovely conversation.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I just thank you so much, just to Indy's intro, to you especially, of course, and then to Indy's introduce as well, because it, just as a debut author, you're starting from zero, like minus zero. So, you know, it's just, I'm just so grateful for any help to kind of find readers, because I do believe in the book, but it still, you know, means so much to find readers. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Booked, the bookstore education podcast brought to you by the American Booksellers Association. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app. Additional educational resources can always be found on the ABA site at www.bookweb.org. Happy reading!